skipper too. A millionaire and his wife, the movie star, the professor and Mary Ann, here on Gilligan's Island.
How many of you remember that show? How many of you got the song now in your head and you'll be singing all through the sermon? I love the part, the movie star. It's always changed. Some of you, when it comes to the adventure of Christianity, this adventure that we've been talking about through the book of Acts, you feel like you got duped into a 3-hour tour. You thought you'd be joining others on this nice cruise that was going to take you to exotic places. You'd be sitting back and you'd be having good food and good drink, and you'd just be able to enjoy all the sights. This great adventure would be full of excitement. Then on your journey in Christianity, the wind started blowing. The waves started crashing. Thunder and lightning in the sky. And all of a sudden, what was supposed to be a fun adventure turned into this stormy, stormy situation. And for some of you, when it comes to where you're at in life and the things that maybe you're facing, you are having a hard time thinking about the adventure, because all you can think about is, I'm going to be stranded on some island with some strange people. I'm going to be stranded, I'm going to be shipwrecked, and I'm not sure I'm going to survive this storm. And whenever I talk about the adventure, all you see is the storm. I was just thinking before the service, or just as we were worshiping, about a church I preached at in Texas. And visited this one time and was preaching there, and the pastor said to me after the service, he said, yeah, I've been here for 10 years, we haven't done any evangelism. Which shocked the life out of me. And I said, oh, how come? And he said, well, we got here, and when we got here, there was all kinds of problems, and so we just decided to focus all on our problems, and we'll worry about evangelism in the future. 10 years of focusing on their problems. And it's incredible how many times when there's storms in people's lives, they want to focus on the storm and forget all about the adventure that God's actually called them to, the destiny and the purpose for their lives. I thought to myself, to this pastor, it's okay to have storms, it's okay to have situations, but there's still a destiny for this church, there's still a destiny for every individual's life. And no matter how many times a storm comes your way, you need to know that God still has an adventure for you. And so this morning I want to talk to you about being caught in the storm. We're looking at the 27th chapter of Acts, and we find Paul is on his way to Rome. He's still a prisoner. He's underneath a centurion by the name of Julius. And Julius has hired this ship to take Paul and a number of other prisoners to Rome. It's at a season in the calendar year where it's just before winter. It's still a good time to sail. There's great confidence in the sailor of this ship, the captain of the ship. They know that they're in a good season weather-wise, and everything should be fine. And yet we find Paul on his adventure getting stuck in a storm. So I want you to turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 27. We're going to look at verses 33 on to verse 44. Lengthy passage, but be worth reading. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they thought that they obtained what they wanted. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it, and we were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Clauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. When the men had hoisted it aboard, they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Fearing that they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. And on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Let me just stop there for a second. There are many times in the storms that we face in life where we actually feel hopeless. Anybody ever been there? You're just looking at your finances, you go on your online banking, and you go, oh my goodness, this is hopeless. You look maybe at your family life and you see a situation, go, oh my goodness, this is hopeless. You look maybe at your marriage and you say, oh my goodness, this is hopeless. Or things at work, oh my goodness, this is hopeless. In the middle of storms, those are the feelings we face. We feel like everything that's brewing around us brings us to a place of feeling hopeless. So let's continue on. Verse 21. After the men had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete, Paul had warned them that God had spoken to them and they weren't supposed to do this, but they didn't listen. Then he says, then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep your courage, men, for I have faith in God, and it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight the sailors sensed that they were approaching land. Then they took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that they would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailor let down the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut the ropes and held the lifeboat and let it all fall away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. And after he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat, and they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. And when they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. And when daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow struck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached the land in safety. Incredible story, going from the place of hopelessness to a place of safety. Paul's had a vision, or God's spoken to them in some way that they're not supposed to take this trip. Julius listens to the captain instead of his prisoner, which makes sense in the rational realm. Sometimes God will speak things that don't make sense in the rational realm. And they fail to listen to Paul. They get on this journey, and we find Paul in the middle of a storm. Friends, in the middle of the storms that we face in life, there are some lessons to be learned. And I want to point out 4 lessons that we see in this passage about facing the storms that we are in. The very first thing I want to point out is this, is that we need to see what others don't see. We need to see what others don't. If you look at verse 23, Paul stands up and he encourages them. They're really, really upset. Just flip over to verse 23 for a second. He says, last night an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood before me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God graciously has given you the lives of all who sail with you. I need you to understand what's going on. I don't know about you, but sometimes I read the passage and there's a lack of picture with it. It's just print on page, and we miss what's actually taking place. And here's this big storm that's been happening, and the skies are dark, and the winds are blowing, and it's raining, and the waves are hitting the boat, and you're inside of this big boat, and there's people all over the place, and the boat would have been shifting back and forth, would have been incredibly wet. People would have been on top of each other because of the turbulence of the boat. They would have been falling all over each other, and there is no place for privacy. That's what I want you to just picture in your mind right now. Paul's not in a place where he's in a little nice soft chapel. He's not in a little church where he's able to get a word from God. He's in the midst of other people who are falling over each other, who are sleeping beside each other, prisoners chained to each other, all over, tossing back and forth. There is absolutely no privacy. And in the midst of the storm, Paul sees what nobody else sees. He sees the angel of the Lord. So many times in our storms, all we see is the wind. All we see is the rain. All we see is the wave. But Paul is a man of God, and in the midst of this, he has stayed so connected to God that he's able to see what nobody else sees. he's able to see the angel of the Lord. He's able to see God's presence right there in the boat. Everybody's looking around and they're seeing people who are just too close. They're in their personal space. They're seeing people who are being sick. They're seeing boxes shifting all over the place where they're staying in water. They see that stuff. But the man of God, the woman of God will always see what nobody else sees. They'll always see what nobody else sees. Friends, I want to tell you, sometimes you're in your storms. You'll be facing situations in life. And everybody will be looking at the situation. They'll be looking at the circumstances. They'll look at your bank account with you and they'll say, oh my goodness, that's really bad. They're seeing what you see. They'll look over at your marriage and they'll say, oh my goodness, that's really bad. People around you will look at your home life or your sickness and they'll see the circumstances and they'll say that's bad. But people of faith will see what others don't see. They'll see the presence of God in the midst of the storm. They'll see God showing up when nobody else can see it. They'll know that he's there. Their eyes will be on what nobody else can see. And if we're going to be able to survive the storms of life, we've got to see what nobody else sees. I want you just to flip over just back to the Old Testament, to 2 Kings chapter 6. Just very, very quickly, 2 Kings chapter 6. Great story. Verse 8. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel, and after conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king, so that he was on guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, will you not tell me which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord, the king, said one of the officers. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very word you speak in your bedroom. And then he's angry. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he's in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there, and they went by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early in the morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Now let's just stop there. Elisha's this individual who keeps telling the king what this king of Aram is about to do, and he's ruining the king of Aram's plans, and the king of Aram is incredibly upset. And so he sends this great army. I just picture Elisha and his servant. I just picture them on this hill, and they're in this little cabin, and the fire is dwindling in the fireplace. It's early in the morning. And the servant gets up and gets out of bed, and he wipes his eyes, and he just kind of tussles his hair. And he decides to go out and get some water so he can brew some coffee. And he opens the door. And he looks out, and what he sees is this incredible army. I mean, there's only two of them. you know you got a bad person that you're going after when you need the entire army to capture them. And the entire armies, there are chariots, there are soldiers, there are all kinds of people with their swords, and they look mean. They're ready for war, and there's just two of them. And I can just see the servant crawling back into the house, and he starts freaking out. Elisha, you got to see what's out there. You got to see our circumstance. Man, we're in a storm now. I told you not to be going around and helping the king. I told you not to go against this king of Aram. I told you that we needed to play it a little bit more safe there, Elisha. Just come here. Look out the window. Do you see what I see? Do you see all that's out there? Do you see the storm that's brewing just outside of our house? All the soldiers, all the chariots. Do you see what I see? And then what happens? Verse 16. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes so he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Opens the door. Tiptoes back. Elisha, do you know the storm that's out there? All the chariots, all the armies. Do you know what I see? Do you see what I see? And Elisha turns to him and says, do you see what I see? Do you see what I see? Don't you worry there, little servant. Don't you worry. We'll be able to go out and get water in just a few moments. He says, you're seeing the circumstances. You're seeing the storms. You're seeing the waves. You're seeing the soldier. And then Elisha says, God, open his eyes so that he can see what I see. And all of a sudden the Bible says that the servant looks out, and now he doesn't just see the Aram soldiers and the Aram chariots. He looks out and he sees hills, the army of God. The army of God who looks much more mightier. There's way more of them. The armies are surpassing this little puny army now. And there's this fire around Elisha. And he begins to see, the servant begins to see what nobody else could see. He begins to see what he couldn't even see at the beginning. And friends, I want to tell you, in the midst of the storm, we need to say, God, open our eyes so that we can see what nobody else sees. We can see that you're with us. That when the armies come against us, when the armies of hell begin to rage against our home, when the armies of hell begin to rage against our workplace, when the armies of hell begin to rage against us, that there's a God with his army and he's fighting for us. We need to see what nobody else sees. But let me tell you something, friends. I'll tell you why we often don't see what others see. I'll tell you why we don't often see the supernatural. Because we don't stay connected to God in the good times. We come into the situation hoping that we can see what nobody else sees. But Elisha's a man of God. Paul's a man of God. They're staying close to God every day. When the storms aren't there, when the armies of Aram aren't there, they're staying connected to God. I want to tell you, I don't know where you're at in your life, but if things are not in a stormy situation right now, this is the moment where you need to be pursuing God with everything you got. This is the moment you need to be desperate for his presence. Oh, but I'm not in crisis. No, but if you don't do it now, then when crisis comes, you won't be ready. You'll only see the circumstances. You'll only see the waves. You'll only see the winds. You'll only see the rain. If you don't prepare yourself now, your eyes will be as blind to the God who's with you as everybody else on the ship. God's drawing us to him right now. In the midst of the storm, we've got to see what nobody else sees. Secondly, in the midst of the storm, we've got to trust God to navigate. Look at verse 27. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. When about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were approaching land. They took soundings, and they found the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings and found that it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that they would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. And then they tried to escape. Friends, I know there's probably not a whole lot that's inspirational out of readings from the water. They're sailing along. I just need to give you some background information to help us with this passage. The way a sailor would take their ship and direct it, they didn't have GPS. There was nothing on their dashboard saying, turn right now. In 400 meters, turn left. There was nothing like that. They would look up at the sky and they would see the stars at nighttime. And the way it would work is they would break the stars into quadrants. And they would know where those quadrants were, and the quadrants would help navigate the ship. 14 days, though. No sun during the day, just clouds. No moon during the day, or during the night, just clouds. No stars. They're not able to determine their location based on the sun. They're not able to determine their location based on the moon. They're not able to determine their location based on the stars. Their GPS system has failed. Power gone. And they're in complete darkness. There's absolutely no way they can navigate this storm. The best sailor couldn't do it. And the Bible tells us that as Luke begins to describe what's going on, that they begin to come near to this part of the water where it's 120 feet deep. They do a sound test, and they check to see how deep it is. Then they do another test, and they see that they're 90 feet deep, and they start to get concerned that they're about to come near the rocks. They are so concerned that this boat is being navigated into damage that they're ready to jump ship. But what we know years later, in the 21st century, is that experts have actually sailed that route that Luke sailed, that Paul sailed, that Julius sailed. They sailed that route where the 120 feet were and the 90 feet were. And these experts say that there was no better path for this boat to actually be on than the path that they were on. In the midst of the storm, they're going aimlessly. The captain's not steering. The captain's not directing this thing, but God's directing it. This is the absolute best path for them to be on, and they don't even know it, but God is navigating the ship. Friends, I want to tell you, in the middle of your storm, you may not feel like you even have control of the wheel. That's okay. God's steering the ship. You need to know that there are times that you will face storms, and you'll be so frustrated. And I don't know if you're like me, but I'm a person who likes to be in control. I believe that the TV converter belongs in my hands. I want to be in control of things. I want to be in charge. I want to grab hold of the situation. I want to be leading it. That's the way I'm made. And there are situations that come along, and I am so frustrated because I go, God, I don't know what to do with this situation because I don't feel like I got my hands on the steering wheel. It feels like we're about to hit the rocks, God. God, if you don't give me the steering wheel back, I'm going to hit the rocks. And we need to know in those times that God is navigating our ship. We may not even see it, but he's navigating our ship. You see, we can trust God to navigate in those times. And sometimes we will think to ourselves, but our decisions have actually put us in this situation. You see, Julius and the captain of the ship had ignored a word from God. The reason why they're about to go through the storm or they're going through the storm is because they made a bad decision. I want you to know that sometimes the storms we face in life have nothing to do with the devil and not a whole lot to do with God. They have to do with your bad decisions. I thought there'd be more amens to that. It's true. It's true. If I get stranded on the highway with no gas, it's because I failed to put gas there. It's not the devil. Oh, the devil siphoned my gas tank. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. It has to do with our bad decisions. And sometimes we're in the middle of a storm and we actually recognize that it's because of our bad decision. And we go, God, why would you choose to navigate in the midst of this? Why would you choose to navigate in the midst of this when this is my bad decision? I made this choice. I failed to do what you told me to do. I was disobedient and found myself right here. So how can I have trust that you're going to navigate? Well, let me explain something. Paul's in the middle of this, and they have disobeyed God. They have ignored the voice of God. But Paul is able to trust God to navigate because there's a purpose for his life. There is a divine purpose. He is to appear before Caesar. Oh, friends, this one encourages me so much. You can be in the middle of a storm. I mean, your bank account could be going empty. Your kids could hate your guts. Let me paint the bad picture. Your house could be falling apart. Your neighbors could be suing you. Your workplace can lay you off. People at church cannot even talk to you. I mean, it could all be falling apart. The cloth is completely unraveling. And the emotions are out of control, and we go, God, how in the world are we going to survive this? You can trust God to navigate because unless he's killed you, he's still got a purpose for your life. He's still, I mean, this so encourages me. And it can go so bad, but unless he kills you, he's still got a purpose for your life. You're standing there, I don't have 2 pennies in my pocket. My clothes are outdated. They're falling apart. My car is about to be destroyed. It's on its last legs. My kids don't like me. My kids like me, by the way. But my kids don't like me, just for illustration purposes. All this is going bad. But God's still got a purpose for my life. God's still got a purpose for my life. Oh, the storms are bad. Oh, the winds are raging. Oh, the waves are getting higher and higher. Oh, the rain's coming down. But I can trust God to navigate me because if he was done with the purpose for my life, he would have just killed me. He would have just killed me. I might only have 3 days left. I might only have 3 days left on this ship, but at least I know I got 3 days of purpose. I got 3 days to go. I might only have a year left, but I got a year left of purpose in my life. And Paul is able to trust God to navigate because he knows that God's got a purpose for his life. His purpose is to go to Rome and to appear before Caesar. And until he gets there, God's not going to kill him. God's still got a purpose for his life. Friends, please listen. I know some of you are facing things that seem overwhelming, but I need you to hear the word of God. You can trust him to navigate your ship because he's still got a purpose for your life. He's still got a plan for your life. He's still got a plan to work out. Sometimes we need to be in the storm just so that he can grab hold of the wheel. There are times that he's been asking for control. He's been asking you to get in the back seat. And you say, no, I know where I'm going, God. And God goes, well, I'll just create a storm so that you can't touch the wheel. Because I want to take you somewhere. I got a purpose for your life. Friends, God's got a purpose for you. God's got a purpose for your family. He's got a purpose for your finance. He's got a purpose for your home. He's got a purpose for your workplace. He's got a purpose for your life. I'm telling you, unless God strikes you down now, there's still purpose for your life. And that's why you can trust him to navigate your ship. 2.5 years old, I was living in Montreal. Little toy, I forget what, Tonka or something like that. You guys remember it was like a white base and had a stick on it and different circles that would go up and just like a pyramid, and little kids would just place and drool and they eat on it and then they stick it on. Rolled mine out into the parking lot in Montreal in this little townhouse subdivision we lived in. All of a sudden, my head's down, this car comes by, runs over me. Not wheels, just I just find myself underneath the car. It was at the right moment that my mom happened to see this, and this car starts to drag me along. It's a storm. But God didn't kill me there. It was a storm. He was navigating. I don't understand why it happened, but he's navigating because he's got a purpose for Jeff Hillier's life. I could trust him. My mom could trust him because he's got a purpose for my life. My mom and dad, at the age of 7.5, they separate. I mean, it was the storm of all storms. But you know what? He's navigating because he's got a purpose for my life. I don't understand why it's happening. I don't understand why all the emotions are there. I don't understand why they can't resolve their conflicts. I don't understand why this has happened to my family. But I know I can trust him to navigate the ship because he's got a purpose for Jeff Hillier's life. 18 years old, I don't know how I'm going to get to Bible college. He's called me there, but the finances are not there. I've told you this story before. And I've been praying and working hard to find them, and I feel like the storm is brewing, but I can trust him to navigate because he's got a purpose for my life. I'm in Bible college. My last year, Ainsley and I are married. We're planning on having a kid, which is Bailey. We're planning on having a kid and started a family, and she needs to get out of this job because she's working nights and losing her mind doing this job. And I feel that God's calling me to Toronto, that he wants me to pastor in this church, and I apply for this church and I'm not hearing from them. And I keep calling the pastor and say, hey, have you got my resume? Have you got my resume? And nothing. And every time I turn around, it feels like I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to find a ministry spot. What's going to happen with my life? It feels like the storm's brewing around me. But I can trust God to navigate my ship because he's got a purpose for my life. Friends, I'm pretty sure that there will be seasons here as the pastor of this church that there will be some storms because we're human beings. I guarantee you. I'm not trying to be in the negative prophet, but I guarantee you there'll be storms. But I'm not shaken because I know that he's got a purpose for my life. I know that he's got a purpose for my life. I mean, it can get terrible, but he's got a purpose for my life, so I'm going to trust him to navigate. Until he takes my breath, until he takes the last breath I have, I will know there's still a purpose for my life. And when he takes my last breath, I know that'll be his purpose. You see, our purpose is tied into our trust. Some of you need to realize that the storms are brewing, and I don't care how old or how young you are, but God still has a purpose for your life. He still wants to get you to Rome. He still wants to bring you before Caesar. And so we can trust him to navigate our storm. In the midst of the storms, we see what others don't see. We trust God to navigate. Thirdly, we recognize the impact of our response. Look at verse 31. These guys are freaking out. They're like, well, we're going to hit the rocks. They pretend that they're going to place anchors. They do what they've done before. They're going to place anchors. And then it says this. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, because he realizes they're actually trying to escape, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut the ropes and held the lifeboat that held the lifeboat and let it fall away. They're about to jump ship. These men are about to jump ship. They're into self-preservation. They're concerned about their well-being. They see that the storm is leading them to the rocks, and they say, we're jumping ship. And Paul stands up and he sees what they're about to do, and he says, look, if these individuals jump ship, if that's their response to the storm, then we're all dead. He turns to Julius, he says, I need you to know that their response actually affects us. Their response to this storm actually affects our life. If their response is negative and they jump ship, we all die. And Julius realizes that he's telling the truth. and says, you're right, tell them to cut the ropes, tell them to get back, they're in trouble. If they escape and Rome hears about it, they're dead meat. Tell them to cut the ropes. Friends, I want you to know something. How you respond in the midst of a storm impacts other people. If some of you are trying to jump ship, you're going to have incredible impact upon those around you. We sometimes think in the middle of the storm it's all about us. The spotlight's there. Oh, I'm the one facing the sickness. Oh, I'm the one who's facing the crisis. Oh, I'm the one who's facing all the issues. But I need you to know that in the midst of every storm, it's not just your faith that's being attacked, it's the faith of those that are watching you. Because your response to every storm is being watched by somebody. You need to understand that. Every time something goes wrong, someone's watching you. I've met negative kids before. You know, I've been doing youth ministry for 20 some odd years. I've met many, many critical teenagers. I know exactly what their parents are like. Right? I know that every time something goes wrong and I hear them complain, that I know where they learned that from. They learned that from watching their parents go through storms. I also know that every time someone is incredibly positive, I know where they learned that from. They watch their parents. I met a young girl this week. She had been in a car accident 2 years ago on her way to youth camp. She had bulging discs in her back that were just giving her excruciating pain. I'll tell you her story more next week. But as her uncle was telling me the story, I looked over at this young 14, 15-year-old girl, and she just said in her thick Newfie accent, I won't even attempt to try to do it, she said, "That's okay, God's got a plan for my life. God's got a plan for my life." And I thought to myself, man, there's a girl whose parents have a good life perspective because she learned it from them. Because in the middle of our storm, the way we respond is actually tied to other people. Our response in every situation is tied to other people. I'll tell you something. You think that you can be the only negative person in your home or the only negative person in your family? No way. You will take other people down too. The more you speak that's negative, the more the people around you will be negative. The more you speak positive, the more the people around you will speak positive. I've met tons of pastors through my life. I remember this one couple. They had faced some storms along the life of ministry because sometimes ministry can be tough. No one would suspect that, but there's some tough moments in ministry. And when I met them, they were complainers. And they would criticize. They'd go through these seasons where they'd be positive, and then all of a sudden something bad would happen, then all of a sudden all the world's falling apart. Oh, God's good, and all of a sudden one little soft summer breeze. Oh, the world's falling apart. I met their kids, and their kids sounded exactly like them. I watched this family. Even when people tried to bless them, they read into it. What do they mean by that? Why are they trying to bless us? They don't think we have money? They don't think we dress well? They're trying to bless us with a new outfit? And what do they think, that we're ugly? They just read into everything. The saddest thing is they didn't realize that their kids were by, and they were watching everything that their parents were doing, everything they were saying, everything that they were every way they were responding. And I watched all three of those kids walk away from God completely. I don't think they're serving God today. My mom, though. My mom. All kinds of chaos in growing up with my mom's family. I've told you a little bit about it. My aunt would tell my mom off and be upset and be childish about some things and get in this big argument. And I watched my mom, and she'd go to God and say, "God, how do I respond?" And she'd call her up after some weeks of this silence. My mom would apologize for things that she never did because she wanted to be a peacemaker. Time after time, she was ill done. My mom would respond in a positive way. "I'm sorry if there's anything I've done." I watched that at my mom. That's why inside of me, I hope that when people do things against me or people speak against me, I'm not going to get all rattled. I watched my mom put something into my life. Her response to the storms have impacted me. I watched as we got to the end of the month and we had no food. Where I'm like, "Mom, what are we going to do? We have no food." And she said, "Let's pray. How about let's go get money?" Do you think God believes in robbery? Like in certain situations, like I think, is there anything called sanctified robbery? Is there anything like that? My mom, let's just pray. And she gathers together and she's praying, and I got to tell you, I'm thinking, what in the world? This is not the way to respond to our situation. We got a loaf of bread and a couple apples in the fridge. What are we going to do with this? And time after time, we get the ring at the doorbell of our apartment. So someone buzz up, say, hey, can I come up for a few moments? And then someone would come up and there'd be baskets of food. She'd go to church, someone would hand her an envelope with some cash in it here. I was thinking about you this week. Time after time, in the middle of our financial storms, my mom showed me that the response was faith, that no matter how bad it was, that we were to keep our eyes on God. And so when things go bad, I'm just positive. I'm positive things are going to get better. Oh yeah, I'm not ignorant of the realities around me. But I serve a God who is able to provide for me in the past, and he'll provide for me in the future. And friends, I want to tell you something. My mom shaped who I am. Her response to the storm helped me respond to the storms of life. And I want you to know that every time you go through a storm, you are connected to somebody. How you respond will be the response of those people around you. But please listen, this is so important. Listen, if you got kids who are negative, you need to watch what's coming out of your mouth. Because they're probably negative, the things coming out of your mouth. If your kids are incredibly positive, congratulations. I'm not trying to beat you over the head. I'm just telling you that your response to every storm, everything you don't like, has a direct impact on somebody else. And so how we respond to the storm has an impact on everybody else. Lastly, we see what others don't see. We trust God to navigate us. We recognize the impact of our response. And lastly, we celebrate what we have. It's so good. Look at verse 34. So good. Just before dawn, Paul, this is verse 33, just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. 14-day fast. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. Okay. This absolutely blows my mind. I mean, friends, I am just so impressed with Paul. He's trying to encourage them. Hey, you guys have been so hungry for 14 days. You haven't been eating. You're getting skinny. You look like you should be on some kind of milk carton. Come on, you need to eat food. And then he says this. After he said this, he took some bread and he gave thanks in front of all of them. He gave thanks. The winds are blowing. And Paul's got this moldy piece of bread. It's been sitting there for 14 days, the elements getting at it. Can you imagine? He's got blue cheese bread, this furry bread. Can you imagine coming to a church that does communion with moldy bread? We've got a tight budget, friends. We just hope you understand. Holds up the moldy piece of bread. Yeah, guys, we need to eat. It's been 14 days. Before we eat, let's just give thanks. God, I thank you so much for moldy bread. I thank you that I have something to eat. I mean, the winds are blowing. The waves are crashing against the ship. I mean, there is water everywhere. They have been living in constant wetness for days upon days. They don't have no idea where they're going. The ship sounds like it's about to break apart. Everybody's talking about death. I mean, they're not singing any happy day songs. I mean, it is a depressing place. This is where emo came from. I mean, everybody's just, younger people will get that. This is just a depressing, emotional, negative place. People are throwing up everywhere. I mean, you can't step in a place where there's not somebody's food from 14 days ago. I mean, it stinks. It smells. People are in each other's space. No one's brushed their teeth. It is absolutely awful. The weather's getting worse. They're headed for disaster. Everybody's negative. I mean, have I painted it? Is it bad? It's bad. Paul holds up the moldy bread. Hey, God, I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you in the middle of the storm. This bread's probably going to be terrible, but at least it's going to meet my needs. God, I want to thank you. You're the God of the storm. I want to thank you that you're the God who's looking after my life. I want to thank you that you're the God who provides. I might only have a few days left, but I thank you for those days. God, I thank you that there's water here. Even though it's at my feet, I thank you for water. I thank you for people. There are people around me. They're not happy, but at least I can talk to somebody. God, I thank you for the things around me. And he begins to thank God in the middle of the storm. And then he says, amen, and he bites the bread. Friends, in the middle of every storm, there's something to celebrate. Did you hear me? In the middle of every storm, there's something to be thankful for. But so many times our eyes are upon the negatives. We're griping and complaining about everything that is wrong, that we miss what God's doing. We miss the things that he's provided. We miss the blessings that we have for our life. It blows me away how, especially in the church, we can get so negative. And I'm not speaking about any situation. There's nothing on the plate right now. But there are times where I see church people in various churches, and God could be blowing the place apart in a good way, and someone's unhappy about some little minor thing. Oh, well, our pastor, he didn't wear his jacket today. Oh, he would have been much more anointed if he had wore that. Yeah, it's true, 12 people got saved, but his jacket was missing. I know, I'm being silly. But friends, we can get so caught up on everything that's wrong that we miss to celebrate that which is right. This lady, she's gone to the top of this building. She's well-to-do. It looks like she's well-to-do, dressed up very, very nicely, an older lady. And she steps onto the edge of the building, and all of a sudden the crowds below begin to see it, and the emergency response team comes in. This lady's about to take her life. All the experts try to call her down. They try to negotiate, have conversations with her, and they're unable to do it. So finally, one of the policemen says, hey, I've got a pastor. I think he can do something incredible. Can I call him? And so they don't know what to do because she's just telling everybody to get away, and everything's not working. So the pastor comes and walks up to the top of this building and begins to walk towards her, and she says, yeah, you stay right where you are. You stay right where you are, or I'm going to jump. And he says, okay. He said, I just want you to know that I'm sorry that you believe that nobody loves you. And every police officer just kind of looks around like, that's not what you say to somebody who's suicidal. You know, you don't say, I'm sorry, life does stink. All right, let's jump together. You don't say that. That's not what they teach you in the planning and the prep for emergency response. He says, I'm sorry that you think that nobody loves you. And she looks at him with a quizzical look on her face, and she says, sir, my grandkids love me. My kids love me. I'm incredibly loved. I've got 8 grandchildren who love me. No, I'm loved very much. Oh, I'm sorry. And he walks a little bit closer to her. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You must be very poor. Now, this lady's a little bit stout. And she says, look at me. Do I look like I'm lacking? She says, I'm well-to-do. I've got money. I've got lots of food. I have a good home. I have a nice vehicle. I have good things. She says, I'm not poor. The man walks closer to her and says, well, ma'am, you got people who love you, and you're not poor. Why are you jumping? She stood there for a second, and she said, you know, I'm not sure anymore. I can't remember. And he walked over to her, grabbed her hand, and she came off the ledge, and then began to show her pictures of her grandchildren. And they walked to the elevator. A few years later, she actually became part of the city's emergency response team to help people who were suicidal. She had just forgot what she was thankful for. She was so caught up in looking at the storm that she forgot to celebrate that which she had. And someone just had to remind her that there are so many good things to celebrate. Let me read you something. I was sitting in the Halifax airport on Friday afternoon doing some reading, and I found this. I'm thankful for the taxes I pay. Any amens? I'm thankful for the taxes I pay because it means I'm employed. I am thankful for the clothes that fit a little too snug. I've felt that this summer. Because it means I have enough to eat. I'm thankful for my shadow who watches me at work. Because it means I'm out in the sunshine. I'm thankful for a lawn that needs mowing, windows that need cleaning, and gutters that need fixing. Because it means I have a home. I'm thankful for the spot that I find at the far end of the parking lot because it means I'm capable of walking. I'm thankful for my huge heating bill because it means I'm warm. I'm thankful for all the complaining I hear about our government because it means we have freedom of speech. I'm thankful for the lady behind me in church who sings off key. By the way, my wife sits behind me and she doesn't sing off key because it means I can hear. I'm thankful for the piles of laundry and ironing because it means my loved ones are nearby. I'm thankful for the alarm that goes off in the early morning hours because it means I'm alive. I'm thankful for the weariness and aching muscles at the end of the day because it means I've been productive. Friends, you can look at the glass half empty, or you can look at the glass half full. How you respond to the storm will dictate the adventure that you live. I got to tell you that this adventure of Christianity is an adventure. It's not void of storms. But friends, how you respond to the storm will determine whether or not you enjoy this adventure. We are called to completely trust God, to see what nobody else sees, to allow him to navigate the ship even when we think that no one's there, to respond in a way that impacts others positively. And then, friends, to hold up the moldy bread and say, God, thanks. In the midst of everything that's going on, to thank him for what he's given us. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Been meditating on this message all week long. There are times I was going into services needing to be focused on preaching, and I was just meditating on this passage and this sermon. And friends, I've been praying for you this week, praying that God would speak to some hearts today, some people who are going through storms. I know what it's like to go through storms. It's hard to sing "Oh Happy Day" in the midst of some of these things. It really is. And I'm not just trying to spiritualize and trivialize the difficulties that life brings us. But I have to tell you, as I was meditating on this, I thought, my goodness, Paul, I think I honor him more and more every day. A man who's faced so much, and now he's facing just one more storm. And I thought to myself, God could have stopped this storm. He could have. He could have made sure this wasn't part of his journey, but he allowed it anyways. And God chose a man to celebrate in the midst of it. Friends, how you respond to the storm is so important. Heads bowed, eyes closed. Let me ask this question. There are some of you who are going through some storms here this morning. And God wants to minister to you right where you're at. I mean, you came into this place and maybe you sang. Maybe you said to somebody when they asked you how you're doing, maybe you said, I'm doing great, but you lied through your teeth because you don't know what else to say. But you're going through a storm. Maybe something's happening in your home, or something's happening in your finances, or something's happening in your workplace, or something's happening in you personally. I want you to know there's a God who's navigating your ship. Friends, there's a God who's navigating your ship. Holy Spirit, open their eyes to see you. Open their eyes to see the armies on the hill. Open their eyes to see the fire that you're surrounding them with. There's a purpose still for their life. There's purpose, God. And this is what I'm going to ask. Pastor Steve, wouldn't you just begin to softly play? I really felt that we need to do this morning. Some of you are going through some trials, and you just need someone to pray over you. You just need to be ministered to. You came here today, and I believe God just wants to take the burden off. It's time to start celebrating in the midst of the bottom of that boat with a piece of moldy bread in your hands. It's time to start to celebrate no matter what the storm looks like. Today's your day. So with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you are facing a storm, you're going through something right now, and you just need someone to minister to you, you just need to be prayed for, would you come forward right now? Come on, I just really believe there's some people here who just need some ministry. Yeah. Come on, there's more. There's more. I'm just asking for altar workers, and maybe some of our board members, if you wouldn't mind coming and just coming and laying hands on these people. God's here to minister to you. It's good. Maybe some of our elders too, some of our well-seasoned prayer warriors, if you wouldn't mind just joining us. Say, Al, come on. Come on, let's lay hands on them and begin to pray that God would show up, that the eyes would be open right now in the midst of the storm. Anybody else need prayer? Just come on, we're here. God's here. He wants to minister to you. Holy Spirit, I pray this morning you'd minister in an incredible way. 14 days, you could have stopped the storm, but you didn't. But God, you were there